Alright, so this is a suggestion via a donation. The name of the video is The Most Miserable City in America. This is coming from the channel City Beautiful. Alright. Let's see where this takes us, guys.
This video is sponsored by Morning Brew. This is the road that leads to Gary, Indiana.
Okay.
Or at least it used to. A while back, the neighboring city of Hammond was resurfacing this road and decided it was better to add a berm at the end of it so it didn't lead to Gary anymore. The fewer the connections, the better, was the thinking. And when you do get into Gary, it feels like a whole different world. It's emptier, quieter, with vacant homes and overgrown lots. It's like a city forgotten, despite being in one of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States.
All right, so I'm guessing definitely property value is probably has plummeted. I'm guessing a lot of blight by the looks of this here. I mean, blight in these gigantic buildings, that's weird. I bet you could buy that building for probably... would be nice. $35,000. How about this? $20,000 with a 20% down payment. That's $2,000. That'll probably come out to a mortgage of $129 a month. Who knows what the taxes are? Keep that in mind. So, like, if you were looking to invest in something like that, I wouldn't.
It was once a thriving steel city, and its former glory days are apparent in the stunning, if crumbling, architecture.
Right, great brickwork.
This steep decline in fortunes led Business Insider to label Gary the most miserable city in the United States in 2019.
All right.
They based their rankings on statistics like unemployment and poverty rates. Business Insider is only the latest in a long line of publications dissing the city.
Guys, these houses don't look bad, but I would hate to, honestly, put money... This is not a house. Maybe this is. There's definitely apartments here, but imagine buying something and thinking that you're going to get some type of solid ROI off of any of this property when it's this close to this blight. Ugh.
Time magazine called Gary, Indiana, the very model of urban decay.
Okay.
As early as the 1950s, it was described as full of sin, crime, and open immorality. This immorality was shrouded in a black pall of smoke from the steel mills.
Okay, for all of that to be said, what was the demographics?
In 1994, Gary was dubbed the murder capital of the U.S., as it had the highest rate of murders per capita of any city in the country.
Okay.
Today, it doesn't even crack the top 10 most dangerous places in Indiana, let alone the United States.
Indiana, wait.
It feels hollowed out, as its population has dropped from 178,000 in 1960 to just 69,000 today. Now, Gary's story is a lot like other Rust Belt cities in the United States, but the fall here was greater. Now, one question I have, because I'm a bit of an optimist, is there a turnaround in store for Gary? So let's talk about Gary's history and its future after the bike belt.
All right, let's go.
This video is actually a personal one for me because my wife is from Northwest Indiana, from this region, and my father-in-law...
Oh, so she's a gangster.
...was actually born and raised here in Gary. I used to...
Okay, he's the gangster. They're both gangsters.
...drive to college through this area and wondered who lived here, and it turns out my future wife did, and now I'm spending a lot of my vacation time here in Gary in Northwest Indiana. So I've always been fascinated with this city, and I'm so excited to be doing a video about it. So let's get into the history. If you drive through Gary on Interstate 90, you can't miss Gary Works. It was the largest steel mill in the world for many years, and is still the largest in North America. Pittsburgh may be known as the Steel City, but no city's fortunes have been tied closer to steel than Gary. In fact, U.S. Steel founded Gary, and the name comes from Albert Gary, the founding chairman of U.S. Steel. Its location at the southern end of Lake Michigan is no accident. U.S. Steel owned iron mines throughout the region, and this area could receive shipments via Great Lakes Freighter or railroad. The Standard Oil refinery in nearby Whiting proved a model for U.S. Steel, as it succeeded in the same strategic location. The city was founded in 1906, and the mills produced their first steel in 1909. U.S. Steel understood that they needed to build a city for its workers, as it was too far away from Chicago for regular daily commuting before the freeway era.
All right, well, I think you just answered your question. I think we can pretty much forecast where Gary will end up, basically. Think about it. If Gary was specifically built for a company, right, and that company's resources have depleted, what's the purpose of Gary still existing? I mean, you'd have to basically find another reason to revitalize a place that is full of blight, similar to what's going on in Detroit. You have to find a reason to make it lucrative for businesses to come into the area, most likely by lowering taxes. I'm just thinking about the economic side of things. You'd have to probably lower taxes on all businesses. They'll come and then revitalize the town. Obviously, then people like me or any other person who dabbles in real estate investment would love to add probably 5 properties to their portfolio for less than $100,000. Right? I'm just going to be honest here. You can buy 5. All right. so just keep that in mind here. You'd have to have someone come in and make a solid attempt to fix the blight. And if there's not a large enough corporation or any type of industry here, then why would people come back to this region? Right? You have to create a draw, bro.
They needed to build a company town, and Gary would eventually grow to be the largest company town in the United States. Many past company towns came with a big dose of paternalism. Company founders would want to create cities to ensure its residents were moral, upstanding, diligent workers.
Right.
This often meant that the company owned the homes the workers lived in and the stores they shopped at. Great for the company, not so great for the workers. One famous example is nearby Pullman, Illinois, home of the company that built fancy railroad cars. It was by all accounts a nice-looking village, and George Pullman hoped it could be a model for urban planning. But when the factory had to cut hours due to lower demand for their rail cars, they didn't cut rents or prices in the company's stores. Workers rose up, and the ensuing Pullman strike is one of the defining events of the U.S. labor movement. The Illinois Supreme Court ruled that the company had to divest its ownership of non-factory property, and the city was annexed into Chicago. Okay. This all happened in 1894, only 12 years before Gary was founded. U.S. Steel wanted to avoid that outcome. Thus, Gary was planned as a community where workers would own their own homes and democratically elect their own completely separate city government. The lack of paternalistic vision was probably wise, but it led to a rather bland urban design.
Right.
Fifth Avenue and Broadway,
because think about it, what could they actually afford?
Were the 2 major thoroughfares, with Broadway leading directly to Union Station and U.S. Steel. The rest of the city was divided up into a grid with 40 houses per block, connected by streets that were quite wide at 8.
Okay, no, guys. Yeah, the planning is absolute trash, guys. Like specifically, if you haven't played like City Skylines or any type of city planning game, like you would instantly know that this is not a great idea. Like I understand, all roads need to lead directly to U.S. Steel, obviously, but
80 to 100 feet. There was one big problem with the plan to have employees own their own houses. Most employees did not make enough to build a home or buy a newly built one.
Right.
Many workers ended up in tents or 3-room shacks that could house up to 20 workers. U.S. Steel got into home construction to try and house more workers, but even their modestly priced housing was out of reach of the lowest paid unskilled workers.
Absolutely.
Land promoters and speculators built ramshackle barracks and tenement housing to fill the gap. The fledgling city government had no regulations that required amenities like running water, so they were absolutely terrible places to live.
Right.
Gary may have avoided the paternalistic model of Pullman, but created their own sort of urban anarchy. The situation was made worse by a lack of public open space. The mills spread across the entirety of Gary's lakeshore, so there's no recreation there. The only recreation, it seemed, could be found in the local taverns. By the 1910s, there was 1 tavern for every 88 Gary residents. Even at this early stage in the
so just basically keep them drunk and they won't complain. Okay.
history of Gary, it had a reputation for being bigger than life, an industrial colossus, but also a den of sin, filled with low-wage single men spending what little they had on alcohol and gambling.
Right.
From this inauspicious start, Gary grew with the fortunes of the steel industry. The population doubled between 1920 and 1940 and reached a peak of 178,000 in 1960. With population growth came demographic change. Much of the early growth had been from Eastern European immigrants, often discriminated against by white workers who had been in the country for a generation or more. Those Eastern European immigrants forged tight-knit communities that characterized Gary's early history. Gary was also a destination for Southern Black workers as a part of the Great Migration, a demographic shift that saw millions of Black Americans resettling in industrial cities of the North. As the new minority in town, Black workers faced discrimination, and by the 1940s and 1950s, white workers had begun to move out of Gary to nearby suburbs, an example of the white flight phenomenon.
Right.
This
wouldn't really call it a phenomenon. It's just what's been happening pretty much in every large city.
Exodus became a flood after 1967. This was a mayoral election year, and incumbent Mayor Martin Katz had the endorsement of the Democratic Machine and Union Steelworkers. But black residents favored Richard Hatcher, a moderate who campaigned on ending patronage and cleaning up corruption. Hatcher won, becoming with Carl Stokes of Cleveland the first black mayors of major American cities. Many white residents took that as their cue to leave, not willing to live in a city where black residents made up the majority and having a mayor that was also black. Gary's population declined between 1960 and 1970, the first time in its history. Meanwhile, Gary became the center of the black political landscape, hosting the 1972 Black Political Convention. Black residents of Gary during this time were proud of their city and happy to have some measure of political control. It's unfortunate, then, that this change in political landscape came at the exact moment U.S. Steel began to lay off its workers. In 1967, 65% of Gary workers were employed at Gary Works. That's an insanely high percentage for one employer.
Yeah, too high.
During this,
to be honest, that's way too high. Like specifically, if you want to keep this town kind of afloat, guys, there needs to be a lot more diversity in terms of where you're working. Okay.
Era, 30,000 people worked there. But Gary's steel mills began to fall victim to deindustrialization.
Right.
This is when one region's industries decline, often because it becomes cheaper to import the same goods from somewhere else. This phenomenon struck the entire Rust Belt of the U.S. hard, but perhaps none as hard as Gary. U.S. Steel cut thousands of jobs in the 1970s and 1980s. Production at the mills actually picked up in the 80s and 90s, and they were producing as much steel as ever, but automation had rendered most jobs obsolete. By the 1990s, only about 6,000 people worked in the steel mills. What happens when a hastily built company town sees massive job losses from its primary employer, while also succumbing to extreme levels of white flight? Well, Gary's population plummeted. By 1990, only 116,000 people lived in the city. The population freefall continues to the present day. The recently released 2020 census shows Gary is home to only 69,000 people. It's lost over 100,000 residents in 60 years. Today, only about 3,000 people work at the plant. Cities aren't designed to lose population, especially not this fast. As cities...
I mean, listen, if you base an entire city exclusively off of one facility, and you then fire everyone, or a large portion of them, they're going to leave the area they're in because the only reason why they're there is for that one very specific thing. So of course they're going to go.
Cities grow, they add infrastructure like sewers, power lines, schools, libraries, and roads. Tax dollars pay for those services. When most people leave, the infrastructure is still there and costs money to maintain and operate. Mm-hmm. Without tax revenues, these services can fall into disrepair. That's what's happening in Gary. 70,000 people who can't pay for a city meant for 170,000. As a result, the city is using what little money they have to demolish buildings, most notably its empty public schools. It's cheaper to demolish them than maintain them empty. Today, Gary only has one public high school left. It used to have a half a dozen.
Right.
Many of Gary's churches are also empty and falling apart. There aren't enough people left to fill the pews. Is it possible to pull Gary out of this nosedive? Well, on paper, Gary has some real positive attributes.
Give me one.
It's still close to the city of Chicago, and you can catch a commuter rail that will take you to Millennium Station. Gary is also unique
that's not important
because its boundaries overlap with a national park, Indiana Dunes. It has a minor league baseball team, the Railcats, who can still draw a crowd on game days.
All right.
Miller Beach, a wealthier and whiter enclave of Gary, still has some life left in it. And housing, unsurprisingly, is extremely affordable here. The city's been trying to promote its airport as an option for a third Chicago airport. O'Hare and Midway are operating at capacity, and there is significant local opposition to expanding O'Hare. The state of Illinois wants to build an airport in-state, but Gary's airport could easily be upgraded to handle significant passenger volumes. If that happens, it would give Gary another economic engine besides steel.
Slightly.
Schools and...
because you'll also now need to figure out a way to get people from Gary to Chicago. Most likely they're not specifically flying into Indiana. Indiana is one of these states that I've never actually been to. I've always considered it, for the most part, a flyover state. I've never actually been there, but now that I'm seeing it, I don't know if I want to be there. He said that Gary isn't even in the top 10 worst cities in Indiana. I'll pass. I'm sorry. No offense if you are from this place, okay? For me, I don't know. I'm not sure I'd like it here. right? But again, you would have to find a way to get people from Gary to Chicago, because most likely these people are trying to actually get to Chicago, not Indiana. So what would be the fastest way for them to get from there to there, unless they have like a train? And we don't have many high-speed trains, so it'll probably take a couple hours.
Infrastructure remain a big concern, however. Gary has closed so many of its neighborhood schools that families may not want to relocate to the area. The biggest barrier, however, may simply be perception. In the 1990s, Gary was rife with gang activity and violence. It's doing better today, but an entire generation of people associate Gary with that reputation.
Okay.
But if you drive through Gary and look past the overgrown lots and empty streets, you see an amazing history. It had once been thriving, and I hesitate to count Gary out. It faces problems greater than any city its size, and it has since it was founded back in 1906. But there is beauty here too, and I hope that the days of a growing Gary come soon. If Gary does make a comeback, it will truly be a fascinating story. The kind of story you might find in one of the frequent short articles posted in Morning Brew, a free daily newsletter delivered to your inbox every day of the week. Morning Brew keeps you up to speed on all the news and current events you need to know about business, finance, and tech in only 5 minutes in a way that's more informative, witty, and relevant than traditional news.
Did you just target
It cuts
me?
through the clutter and gives you what you need every morning. For example, when I was writing this script, I got to read about an update on the broken international supply chain, a Chinese real estate development group on the verge of collapse.
Oh, they all are, bro. Listen, the Chinese real estate investors are out there building gigantic cities in the middle of nowhere, and they're empty. Okay, like they recreated Paris with the Eiffel Tower. They built an entire European French city in China, and no one lives there. There's like 5 people in the entire city built for like 10 million people.
And the wrapping of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. I really appreciate that I can read about business and art from 2 different parts of the world in one newsletter. Since you watch this channel, I know you like getting smarter about the world around you.
Generally.
So go ahead and start your mornings with Morning Brew by subscribing, completely for free, using the link in the description. It's one of the best ways you can support this channel for free, and you get to stay up to date on current events. There aren't many win-wins as good as this. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
All right, listen. I think personally, if Gary is going to make a turnaround, let's say, then Detroit would also, St. Louis will, like all of these cities that are absolutely plagued with blight because people left the area and jobs left the area. Because again, why would people stay in places where there are no jobs? Now, the fact is here, just looking at the real estate locally in this area, it is extremely cheap to live here. It's almost like, bro, 1980s cheap. I see houses here that are actually livable, maybe 50, 40, 48. All right. You know, but where the job's at, they're not here by the looks of it at all. Right. If you are someone who like works from home, maybe you could probably get a really good deal. Keep in mind, all these properties are going to need some type of work, and they're really small. They're all like bungalows, if anything, guys. I'm seeing like 900 square feet, 912 square feet. Again, 900, 1,034, 697. These are absolutely minuscule homes, but they are, in fact, homes. They're going to need, again, some work. Absolutely, because disrepair is no joke. We've seen a lot of that on this video here. But I would not suggest any type of investing going on here for probably another maybe 2 decades. I wouldn't touch this place unless we start to see kind of a turnaround, right? Like Detroit actually is turning around, oddly, weird, strangely, right? I mean, because Michigan itself is strong. So, of course, they would end up wanting their city to be somewhat revitalized. Is it going to be purely based off of building cars now? No. Right? But Detroit is, in fact, turning around, and property there is still moderately cheap. Around these prices, I'd say. I mean, but I think these probably are slightly more put together than some of the ones in Detroit, right? And it's definitely a shame that they're tearing down some of these old buildings in Gary. But I understand if you want to specifically make sure that people don't have places to hide bodies, because a lot of times, if you've ever done any type of like urban exploration, you can run into a situation sometimes that's awkward, all right? Where you walk out of the building and people are looking at you like, hope that this person didn't find this thing, and you kind of have to, keep walking straight. Just walk straight. Don't even pay attention to the people who are staring at you, because they hid a body in there. And they think you saw it, and you did. But you're not going to say nothing, are you? Until you leave. Then you're going to call the police, right? But the point is, okay, you will run into situations in some of these buildings that, they need to be torn down for kind of that reason. And safety, obviously. They're crumbling. You don't want someone inside of it as they're crumbling. Or they were built extremely long ago and they have asbestos and lead paint and all these things that are extremely toxic to our 2024 sensibilities, right? You understand what I'm saying here? I get that, but it's still a shame that they have to be torn down, and these buildings that were once built could not be turned into something. We're currently like suffering from a housing crisis where we just do not have enough houses for people. This is why, honestly, if you want to get into any type of anything, real estate is where it's at, right? You want to start developing at the very least. And an area like this would be primed for that if you can get the right people into the area, but there are no jobs. Everyone is going to purely depend on, work from home type of thing. And if they can work from home, this sounds like a really good deal. Okay. And the fact that those structures were already built, all you would really have to do was check plumbing and electricity, start reframing the buildings out to make, even if they're like loft apartments, bro, like don't tear these gigantic buildings down. They're worth so much money fixing them. They're worth so much money. And then you can make money while you're also helping the housing crisis. See, do you see what I did here, guys? I helped you out today. All right. I did really good. Hopefully you take my advice, heed the advice here. All right, I occasionally drop some gems for you guys to kind of pick up on, right? But all right, listen, you guys all have an absolutely amazing day. And please, enjoy your day thoroughly. Guys, before we go, are you guys subscribed to the other channels? Logical Movie Reviews with Mr. L. Boyd along with Mr. L. Boyd Music. Both are found in the description. Check it out.